an hour past our regular time for True Crime Convos, but alas, here we are. I needed to make it an hour later than what we usually do for True Crime Convos, so apologies that we are an hour behind schedule, but such is life. I just got back from vacation, a back injury, baby being sick. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing that's happening. But I have a lot of things to catch you up on. So here we go. Welcome to True Crime Convos. I'm your host, Lanie. I am the host of the True Crime Cases podcast with Lanie. You can find that on any Spotify, podcast, etc. platform, wherever you listen to your podcast. I am also the host of the It's Haunted What Now podcast, an independent paranormal podcast. Happy to welcome all of you for True Crime Convos this evening. As you know, we start every True Crime Convos here with our ASL. Sorry, it's been a few weeks, I feel, right? Like I've missed the last 2 weeks because of just random things. So, hi, Cecile. Thank you for joining us. Hi, everybody else. So, I wanted to talk tonight about the latest podcast from Cast Media. It's called True Crime. Sorry, that's my podcast. It's called Rabia and Ellyn Solve the Case. And it's a very interesting podcast for a person like Rabia Chaudry. She, if you don't know who Rabia is, she is the person behind Adnan Syed's name being a well-known name in the true crime world. And it's just been an interesting day, I would say. So if you don't know, we start off every True Crime Convos with a ASL check. So if you are aware of what an ASL is, please be sure to list that in our chat. If you're joining us on YouTube, on Twitch, or on Twitter when we're doing Twitter Spaces, I think, or in our Spotify Live room, ASL in the chat. I am Lanie, 35-year-old female from Dallas, and I go by she, her pronouns, cis female, happily married with a mom, have a baby, all that fun jazz. Feel free to put that in your, what's it called, in the chat. So hi, Torstein, and hi, Devin, joining us here on YouTube. Hi, Ashley. Thank you so much for joining. All right, so let's get into the podcast. I'm not really going to go over all of the details in the Scott Peterson case. I think for those of us who are well acclimated in the true crime world, we have a pretty clear idea of the crime that was committed against Laci, Rocha, and Connor Peterson. I choose to refer to Laci by her maiden name as her family's requested that, so I'm sticking to that. I'm not referring to her as her married name. And for Connor, of course, he was also Scott's son, so I'm going to be using Connor Peterson. So Rabia and Ellyn, this is a step away from what Rabia normally does, right? She's a very big advocate in the true crime world. She has a podcast called Undisclosed, that basically points out the flaws in these convictions that she feels are wrongful convictions. So it was interesting to see them take on the Scott Peterson case because I don't know about a lot of you, but if you're here joining us on any of our other platforms or even in Spotify Live, go ahead and put in the chat if you think, based off of your knowledge of the Scott Peterson case, if you think that Scott Peterson is guilty. I'll give you some time and drink water. So everybody just let me know in the chats. We have, yes, you think he's guilty. I will say after the podcast, I still lean more towards Scott being the perpetrator than anybody else, but they make some very compelling arguments when it comes to Scott's case and the flaws with it. So, in regards to the trial, right, they were focusing more so on the facts. And I think for some of those who follow Rabia, you're going to be a little put off by her interaction with Ellyn in the podcast. I think everybody's kind of used to Rabia being very serious and very focused on, you know, the trials and things like that. So it's a little bit of a departure from her. It's nice to see her kind of relaxed and really engaged in the content that she's creating with Ellyn. I know for some people, I've seen a lot of things like on Twitter and other social media um, that's kind of attacking her for being not super serious and not super composed during the episode. But I think if you've been following Rabia online and you've seen her on her Instagram lives or anything like that, this isn't a surprise for you in terms of her personality. So I would say go in understanding that you're not going to hear her be very super serious all the time. Like she's really engaged in the content and she's having a good time in the discussion. Not to say that the the topic is particularly fun, but this is kind of something she thrives in that sense. So they go through the timeline of Laci's day and what that looks like and what Scott himself has basically put out to sorry, I'm making sure I have everything together. Um what Scott basically gave to detectives the day Laci was reported missing. This all happened very fast. And I think for some of us, this is what happened in 2002. So this is all very much happening at rapid speed. More so quick, like very quickly compared to how we see things rolling, now when it comes to missing persons cases or cases where a spouse is potentially involved. So, yes, 2002 is when this happened. So, as we know it today, and this is kind of something that they talk about in the timeline, and this is all stuff like I had to vet on my own too, because it kind of felt like, they felt very sure about things. But again, that's how it goes with this type of podcast. It's basically people's opinions based off of the facts that they're reading. So, in 2002, it's December 24th, 2002. Um, Police believe the prevailing theory, what was used in the prosecution against Scott, is that the murder of Laci Peterson happened on the night of December 23rd. And Rabia says, like, that might be actually impossible because they're thinking the police's theory is that he killed Laci the evening of the 23rd after they went to go see her sister. She comes home, learns to curl her hair because she asked her sister how to do that. And they either have dinner or they don't. And then Laci ends up being murdered by Scott that evening. So he has the opportunity to like wrap her body in a tarp, throw it in the back of his truck, and then waits until the next day to concoct this full story of everything that kind of happened, right? As we know the timeline to be. So police believe she died the evening of the 23rd. Now, that contradicts some of the evidence that's actually out there that, the police will say, okay, she died on the 23rd. He spent the rest of the day concocting all of these things and putting all of these plans into motion to make it look like Laci was alive on the 24th. Nobody but Scott, um, I think, I can't remember now. I feel like I'm saying that super sure. But they said that, like, basically, police said nobody but Scott saw Laci alive on the 24th. So Scott says that around 9:30 that morning, he tells Laci, I'm going to go run some errands, got to run up to the warehouse, all this stuff. So they're like, okay, fine. That may work because you left at like 9:30 ish or something. Scott remembers what was on TV, what Laci was doing, etc. So Scott goes to the warehouse and does his business, goes to the Berkeley Marina, unloads his boat into the water, and goes fishing, right? According to Scott's timeline and what's out there. Supposedly, Laci's back at home mopping the floors, and then she's going to take their dog Mackenzie out for a walk. Once this is all kind of happened, everybody and the Rochas defend Scott. They are like, there's no way he would ever do anything to harm Laci. And the police are like, well, he's kind of acting very nonchalant about his pregnant wife being missing. And they point out something interesting because they're like, oh, well, there's flaws in Scott's statement to police. First, he says he's going fishing or golfing. Then he says it's too cold. So now he's going to go fishing, but it's not too cold to go fishing, and that's fine, right? And I think a lot of people kind of lean on that fact, like, who the hell goes fishing, in December at in the San Francisco Bay, essentially. And what I learned from this, and I had no idea. Guys, also, I covered this case on Crimes of Passion. I'll get into that in a minute. On Crimes of Passion as well. But I found out in Rabia and Ellyn's podcast that Laci Peterson's stepfather actually also went fishing that day. So it kind of puts that into perspective that it wasn't such an abnormal thing to do, right? It wasn't this weird thing. So for golf, I don't know if any of you golf. If you do, let me know in the various chats that are active here. But for those of you that golf, like, the wind makes a big difference, right? So if it's cold and windy, it's going to impact your game, it's going to impact your swing, the direction of the ball, etc. And for fishing, it's a little bit different. Like, sure, it's going to be cold, but you can, wear a down jacket or a down coat, wear gloves. Like, you can basically, like, cuddle up on the boat, throw a fishing line over, and hang out, right? The other thing that they didn't point out that I thought was also interesting, that is a flaw in Scott's story, which leans more dinging to me on the guilty side, is, and I don't know how big of a deal this is, right? But he also said in a statement the reason that he ended up wrapping up early on the fishing side was because it was raining, or it started to rain. But no weather reports that day show any rain in the forecast, or that it did rain. So there's one ding in terms of, like, the facts that are available in the research from the side of Robbie and Ellyn. So I thought that the stepdad going fishing was pretty compelling to say that it's not super abnormal then, as abnormal as we thought it was, or as normal as the media made us think it was, right? So that was compelling to me. Another thing they mention, they focus a lot on the timeline in terms of, like, this time wouldn't have worked if they said, like, okay, Scott, say she didn't die or wasn't murdered the 23rd, like the police thought. Well, then that means that she would have had to been murdered in the morning, right? And if anybody has seen what Modesto looks like, and particularly Laci and Scott's house, their houses are very close together. They're right, I mean, like, you're right next door to your neighbor. So I would imagine that if you are rolling a tarp out, or pulling your truck into the driveway where Scott was parked, it would be pretty easy to spot. Sorry, pretty easy to spot that he was taking a human-sized roll into the back of his truck. Now, we also know, I hope you know, if you've looked at Laci's case or anything like that, Laci's body was found dismembered once it was found in the bay. I'll get to that in a minute, but for me, I was kind of able to go back and say, well, yes, they didn't find any, like, blood evidence, but that's not to say that he couldn't have done something somewhere else, dismembered her, and then, discarded her body in the bay in the boat. They do point out, because I didn't know what type of boat Scott had. I was thinking it's like a marina, like, I mean, a regular old sailboat that you see out on the lakes now, right? But they said it was an aluminum boat, and those are a lot smaller. And there was an individual who actually approached Mark Garagos, the defense attorney for Scott Peterson, and said that he saw inside of Scott Peterson's boat when Scott was unloading his boat into the water, which he struggled to do because it was a new boat for him. He had been fishing before, but this was a new, a new purchase for him. So he was trying to get it out on the water or something. But this individual basically said, like, yeah, I looked inside his boat. Like, I had a great viewpoint for it, and there was nothing in his boat. If I'm on a jury and I hear that an eyewitness, and again, us in true crime who are aware of kind of how that system works and how eyewitness testimony is flawed inherently and not as what's the accurate, right? Not as accurate as we think it is. That would sow some seeds of doubt for me if I was like, "Oh, you didn't see anything, right?" Well, that's what police believe happened, is that he put Laci's body in the boat, dumped it overboard. So, curious now that you guys know those factoids, at least, and this episode is like an hour long. So, there's a lot that they're going through. And again, they're not hashing out anything other than the facts of the case, the facts that are verifiable, that were provided by Scott and that were verified by the evidence collected and by the Modesto PD. So, now that you guys know that, right, that the stepdad went fishing same day, so it's not abnormal, that the murder would have had to happen on the 23rd if we're to believe that this, happened the night before. And remember, this would mean if Laci was murdered the evening of the 23rd, and I'm going to get into something else too that's a little bit more telling in my mind. So, if Laci was murdered on the 23rd, that means that the 24th, Scott would have had to log into Laci's computer, pretend to be shopping for a sunflower umbrella stand and a scarf, pretend to take the mop out and get the water ready. It's crazy to think about in terms of that. So there's these two things, and then the aluminum boat and the eyewitness. So those three things first, I was like, okay, that's pretty compelling. I think that would sow some reasonable doubt on me, on my end, if I was a juror. Very curious to hear what you guys think about that too. So I do floss regularly. Thank you, Papizolo. So the other thing they move into, right, is Scott's demeanor over Laci's disappearance and the fact that the police deemed him to not be concerned enough about her disappearance. And I think that that's relative. I think that it could just be how Scott is. Maybe he's very aloof. I heard that a lot about him. And so for me, yes, that would be something I can be concerned about. But I think that it's a little strange to only focus on that as something compelling. And keep in mind, there's actually no actual physical evidence has gone to Scott and said, Scott has officially been, sorry, I'm trying to figure this part out here. Scott has been connected to the crime. There's nothing that has been discovered that was put in for evidence or anything like that. So it's really interesting that they pointed that piece out. The second thing was Connor's autopsy and the robbery that took place. So I thought this was interesting too. They talk about this robbery that took place in a house that was catty corner from Laci and Scott's house. And they say, well, the alternative is that Laci confronted these robbers. They ended up kidnapping her and held her for a while until they killed her, essentially, because they were waiting to harvest her organs because some of her organs were missing from her body. Would just disappear on their own. They weren't taken out by fish or anything like that. So this was something that would have had to have been done on purpose. So as we know, there is some like black market harvesting that happens. So it's a little interesting, a little compelling in that regard. And Connor's autopsy also revealed by the medical examiner, right? This is in the medical examiner's testimony that he was full term when he was born. He was not ejected from Laci's body in a way that would say he was born prematurely or that he was born in, or that he was basically expelled from Laci's body as what happens when um, a, a mother dies while the baby's in utero. Um, let me see. Let me go back here and do something. Sorry. I'm getting used to how this new format works for me. So, I think it's really compelling in that regard, um, about Connor's autopsy. That's really strange to me. I don't know if that makes a difference to anybody else, but I was looking through, and I'm not going to get into it or anything like that. I don't want to get too graphic with it. But I was looking through it, and and the testimony from the medical examiner and the reports from the medical examiner all basically say that they can't discount that a live birth happened. And again, there's no way around that science. There's no way around Connor growing to term. She was 8 months pregnant. Okay, so she would have to go another few weeks before he was considered full term, at least at 39 weeks or 40 weeks. Um, there was no way for that science to not be correct in terms of him being a full term baby when he was expelled from Laci's womb, if he was expelled from Laci's womb. They also talk about a piece of twine that was seen around his neck. And let me see. Okay, there we go. Sorry. There was this weird person in my chat being super strange. And I had to get them out. But yeah, I thought that was really, really compelling. That to me changed a lot because I could not wrap my brain around the science of that, of trying to find an excuse of why Connor's body would be full term upon Laci's death. And you also have to remember Connor was found, I think, in or with a plastic bag attached to him in some way. And so there was this idea that he may have been placed in the bag um, after death, or it caused his death. They can't really say, right? Because again, he was um, found deceased, and they would say that their body was not in the water for those months that it took to find them. Rabia and Ellyn point to the fact that over and over again in the media, they are constantly pointing to where Scott was that day. And they're banking on the people who robbed the neighbor's home as the killers, basically. The people who robbed those neighbors essentially said, hey, we weren't there that day. We actually did it the day afterwards. So there's no way we killed that lady. The first time that they were arrested, they basically said, you know, we didn't do it on this day. The police are like, oh, okay, you didn't do it on that day? Amazing. No worries then. We don't have to worry about looking and vetting that. We can just keep it going and it's totally fine. Um, so they didn't actually vet vet them at all and say like, oh, okay, they didn't check alibis or anything. They're robbery burglars. So I don't know how how authentic or how credible their alibis would be anyway. But they make a good point. And there was also some eyewitness testimony that said they saw a pregnant woman that matched Laci's description, squatting near a van and peeing and then being pulled back into the van. So basically, Robbie and Ellyn believe that Laci was held captive for some time. She was allowed to give birth to Connor and then quickly killed right after, because Laci's body, when she was found in the bay, her head was completely missing and so was her neck. And that doesn't happen just like due to predation, right? In the ocean. I have not seen any science or history that comes out saying like super huge potential for you to just lose your head if your body ends up. I mean, oftentimes I expect the slippery skin. I expect like how Elisa Lamb was found when somebody is in water for a considerable amount of time, where essentially everything is like liquefied as it happens in death. But then also the skin is very liquidy. Sorry to get too, I'm trying not to get too graphic about that. But again, and then her arm was missing at the elbow, or from the elbow down, same thing from the knee down on one of her legs. So there was just a lot of forensic evidence that really wasn't explained. And what they're saying is the reason that Scott Peterson was convicted of Laci's murder was Amber Frey, or Amber Fry, whatever. And this was another point that they made that was compelling to me, because Amber has absolutely nothing to do with Laci's case, with the case against Scott Peterson. Truly, nothing to do with it. They had met. Again, prosecution's theory is that, Scott didn't want to have a baby. He wanted to be with Amber. So it was best to get Laci out of the way. But so Scott didn't want to have a baby, right? But Amber has a kid that she is the sole provider for. So he's fine killing his wife and unborn child, as long as he can have this pretty little massage therapist and her grown child. Like, he's a top, well, I don't even know how old the kid was, but well above 4 years old, I'm pretty sure. So I don't know, you guys, just based off of what you heard, very curious to hear if you think that he's still guilty, or if there is some compelling information that was provided. I highly recommend listening to the episode. I don't typically listen to podcasts that have a lot of banter in between, but because Ellyn, I think, is a comedian, so she makes a lot of jokes, not directed at Laci or even directed at Scott, but just like about other stuff. And for me, I take true crime very seriously, so I like serious true crime shows. I don't need any like levity or brevity in any of my listening, if you will. Like for some of those shows that are comedy driven or that have kind of lighter moments in them, that's not typically the type of show that I listen to. So I wouldn't be listening to like a Morbid or anything like that, right? But yeah, they pointed out some really interesting and compelling stuff. And if you can stomach it, I would say after you listen to the episode, to look at the autopsy that's out there. It's not descriptive in the sense of like you see pictures, it's the testimony. Yes. So interesting you mentioned the prosecutors. They're highly, highly controversial in our true crime world, apparently. I was seeing lots of Reddit threads on these people, but I don't know them, so I'm fine. Anywho, very interesting. Definitely would recommend listening to the podcast, because it did help. It did help kind of make me lean. I don't know that he's not guilty, but I do think that his trial was definitely one of those that was tried by the media first before he really had an opportunity. And there were so many mistakes in Laci's case from an investigation point, basically releasing where Scott was. They released so much information. They released so much information about Scott's whereabouts, about his alibi, everything. Like, if you were somebody who had actually killed Laci Rocha. And you had the husband who was just like being a fucking idiot, truly. Sorry for cussing, but truly being an idiot, right? Um, being on the phone with Amber during the vigil, not saying anything during the vigil. Those are all things that, yes, he may be a douche, but does that mean that he murdered? How many people, truly, you guys, do you know that are like actual douchebags? But would you be like, definitely murder their wives? And you're like, no, they're just a freaking jerk. Um, and was he a weak man for having an affair while his wife was pregnant? 100%. Does that mean that every person who has cheated on their spouse or significant other is automatically a murderer? Think about that in terms of your own life, right? If you've ever had anybody who's cheated on you, or if you have cheated on somebody that you were in a relationship with, and that person suddenly went missing, and then their body was found, and the media is basically pointing to you and saying, like, yeah, you're not sympathetic enough. You're also a cheater. So for sure, Laci is a sympathetic victim in all of this, right? She is a pregnant woman. You look at her face, she's bubbly and she's bright. You can just tell that she was just a sweet person. Everybody describes her that way. Um, so it's really interesting to see how kind of the media played at that point. Rabia even goes as far as to apologize to Scott's family and to Scott himself, even though he probably won't hear it, um, to say that she was part of the kind of the mob that was against him based off of just what she heard in the media. So I think it's really interesting now, 20 years later, we're looking at this case again. Scott's supposed to have, I don't even know if the appeal's gone through yet, but an appeal for a new trial. And honestly, I think he should get one. I don't know that it would say he was guilty or not. Um, but I think looking at the other convictions, the wrongful convictions that are out there that we've seen, that people were convicted on like not much of anything, super circumstantial evidence. Yeah, I would prefer something more solid. So, highly recommend listening to it. I don't know that I'm going to be a long time listener. Actually, I doubt that I will be unless the case they talk about is compelling or interesting to me. Otherwise, I don't necessarily think that it's a show for my listening ears. I do think there are people out there who will enjoy it. Let's see. Ashley said, yeah, I've never listened to the prosecutors, to be honest with you. But yeah, I saw some interesting Reddit threads where I was like, I'm probably okay. And maybe those affiliations and those comments don't bleed over into your content, I want to say. I don't know because I don't listen, so I can't say for sure. But I would say that maybe now, since you've listened to them and you look at that information that's readily available to the public, not that I'm pointing anybody towards any direction either way or saying not to listen. I don't care if you listen to their show or not. Would highly recommend, though, if you do like an attorney's point of view on cases, highly recommend listening to Defense Diaries from Bob Mata. He's what he calls a recovering defense attorney, and he actually does an incredible job. The first season is all about John Wayne Gacy, because his dad, Bob Mata Sr., was John Wayne Gacy's defense attorney. Honestly, Bob's podcast changed my mind about defense attorneys. I don't know if anybody else was in the same boat as I was. Very naive in terms of like the prosecution versus the defense. Always for me, prosecution side. I didn't know any better, didn't think to know any better. And then, I'm listening to more true crime content. I'm seeing wrongful convictions. And I'm like, wait a minute. Prosecutors aren't always the good guys? This is crazy. Defense attorneys? What? And Bob made a really good point. I always point this out because he said that oftentimes defense attorneys are associated with their clients. So imagine Bob Mata Sr. being the person that's defending John Wayne Gacy and people thinking he's just as bad as John Wayne Gacy, which is not true. So yeah, Bob's podcast, Bob himself, changed my perspective on the justice system and on the roles of prosecutors and attorneys. So we also have some incredible, you guys, big news in the true crime world that just happened. Yes, highly recommend ethical true crime whenever you can get it. But again, I don't judge anybody for choosing to listen to other podcasts that aren't necessarily ethical because, that's the content they choose to listen to. So no judgment here. So today, the state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby for Baltimore, aka Maryland, um, dropped the charges against Adnan Syed. DNA evidence came in last Friday that has essentially eliminated him as a suspect, as pretty much everything. So I think that now the next step for Adnan is to request factual innocence. So they have to appeal to the court system to vacate everything and to give him his name back, etc. Which now opens the door, if he gets it, which I think he will, which now opens the door to possible compensation. This is like 20 plus years. And if you remember, Heyman Lee's brother and family petitioned the court to basically appeal the decision, not the stay necessarily, but just to say, like, we didn't get enough notification, so he needs to be back in jail so we can be back and compel you to listen to us until, and then you can make your decision. I'm assuming that's what that means. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I have no clue. I'm just conjecturing from what I've seen. The Friday evidence that was delivered, the state dropping the case today, means that that whole situation is over and done with. But now this means what Marilyn Mosby said today in her news conference was that, and what I've seen online from Colin Miller, who's also a part of the Undisclosed team, one of Rabia's colleagues on Undisclosed, what I saw essentially was that the DNA evidence eliminates Adnan but points to someone else. And I don't know if anybody else read Adnan's story by Rabia, but she gives a really, really interesting take on what she believes happened to Hay based off of the evidence that's out there. And I'm not going to, again, Adnan's side has asked people not to name any suspects. If you know, you know. If you've been a longtime listener, starting with Serial to Undisclosed, and you've been following ever since the beginning, you know, okay? I think reading the motion to vacate gave a lot of information, and there's actually more information. There isn't even a bombshell yet that's been dropped that Rabia was saying was going to be dropped. Hasn't been dropped yet. So I can't even imagine. So Friday's evidence basically exonerated Adnan. He is a free man. And unless he commits another crime, which I highly doubt he will, because he has not done anything, obviously, because he's been in prison. Yeah. Okay, water break. Cheers. So that was huge news today. Not anything I expected to happen. I kind of expected this to go slowly because it's DNA, so I'm very, very surprised. This was also DNA evidence that could have been tested a long time ago. And the state's attorney's office and the Maryland AG, the attorney general, are like supposedly on the same team, but are fighting each other to say, like, oh, he needs to be in prison. Oh, the motion was stupid. Like, you should have told our office. Basically, they don't care that they had multiple Brady violations, that they had multiple investigators and prosecutors who were involved in nefarious misconduct as it relates to Adnan's case. So very, very interesting that they're continuing to fight this, even though there's nothing to fight anymore. And there was a person, shout out to, I forgot your name, a person on TikTok who was going at me and told me, listen to Serial so that you get the full story. Listen to Serial so you find out what really happened, because Jay Wilde's story is what, changed everything. And I'm like, babe, I've listened to Serial. How about you listen to Undisclosed? Because that's where the real story is. How about you look at the actual evidence? Because that's where the real story is. And yeah, very interesting information out there. So yes, that wraps up the conversation on the Scott Peterson case. Highly recommend listening again to that podcast episode. If you choose to listen in the future. Amazing, wonderful stuff. Love to see it. Love to hear it. Then I have some other interesting news. I don't know if any of you guys follow me on my social media, but it has been a journey. It has been an interesting day. Just kidding, interesting week. So last week, this is drama, y'all. If this was a drama channel, I'd be making some money off of it. Let me tell you what. So last week, I was on vacation and I get sent this link to a news article that's out. So I'm thinking, oh, my friend wants me to look at this, understand what's happening. Maybe it's true crime related. Then I open it and it's a article to the Hollywood Reporter. And in that article, it says essentially that Spotify has laid off some of its staff from Gimlet and from Parcast. And so obviously, as you know, I hosted the Crimes of Passion podcast on Spotify. So in the article, I find out that the Crimes of Passion podcast has been canceled. And I'm like, guys, what does this mean? What happened? No communication whatsoever, right? There's been no text, emails, nothing. Full 24 hours. And I'm like, I don't know what to think. I don't know what to believe, what's happening. I'm trying to contact people. I'm not getting really much of any information. I understand why now. Not going to go into that. But I get it. And so I essentially find out adjacently that I'm done recording. The show's been canceled. It's done. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, we're going through a whole thing right now. We don't really know what's going on. It's really strange. I'm hoping to gain some clarity. From my side, I definitely want to say goodbye to, if Crimes of Passion's over, then I would like an opportunity to say goodbye to those listeners because, I've been with Parcast at least for 3+ years. So I would have liked to say goodbye to the listeners. So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know anything of that nature yet, but I'm hoping that we get some clarification on this soon so that we can move forward positively and do what's right by the listeners of Crimes of Passion and those who enjoy my narration on the podcast. So it was an interesting few days, I will say. So, followed me on my social media journey with that. That was fun. Much better now. But yeah, we have a lot of things kind of just coming up in the air. True Crime Convos, as you know, I'm no longer affiliated with the Spotify Live platform in terms of being a contributor. Officially, they've changed directions in that. Again, that was another situation that wasn't communicated effectively. So, it's a whole thing. But I'm always grateful for the opportunities that I've been given. It really did, let me tell you what, it really did make me feel like shit to read that article. Not gonna lie. I think it was pretty crappy of a situation. It's not the way that anybody should find out anything about something that directly affects them. So, yeah, that part sucked. But anyways, as it relates to True Crime Convos, I'm still going to keep going. Even if I'm not really affiliated on the Spotify Live platform, I really enjoy the format and I really like it. That means that now that I can kind of control what I'm doing in terms of the scheduling and all that stuff and the content, I really want to change it up. I have some obligations still to meet on the Spotify Live side. And this also gives me time now with the whole Crimes of Passion thing that happened to be able to really formulate how I want to approach these things going forward. But yeah, I'm aiming and hoping that I can start doing giveaways and stuff for people who join us on any of the platforms on Twitch or on YouTube, Twitter, on Spotify Live, wherever. Want to be doing giveaways for sticker packs and for other merch and things like that. Or even coupon codes for any of our live streams that we do in the future that are or paid live streams, or even to True Crime Podcast Festival, those types of things. very, very thrilled and excited. I also hurt my back last week, so I'm a little uncomfortable. So I'm not going to go the full hour just because it hurts me a lot. I get really stiff. I don't know what happened. I'm planning to take care of it soon this week. It's been a lot. It's been a lot going on. So I appreciate you sticking with me. Just remember you can listen to my independent shows, aka the shows that nobody can cancel except for me. You can listen to True Crime Cases with Lanie on any podcast platform that you listen to. If you like spooky or paranormal stories, I also have a podcast called It's Haunted What Now, where I share listener stories. We get into the spookiness of it all. Paranormal is like my second favorite thing to listen to in terms of podcasts. So I really, really, really love being in that format too. And then, of course, we have the live streams for True Crime Convos. You can follow me if you click on my picture in Spotify Live, or if you click in the links in any of our descriptions that are on our Twitch, YouTube, or Twitter. You can follow me directly there and hang out with me. If you have episode requests or suggestions that you'd like to hear for cases that are interesting, feel free to ping me and let me know. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody who joined me tonight. I know it was past our time that we normally start. Typically, we'll stay at 6 o'clock Central and keep that consistent. But the last few weeks, it's been a little difficult. I've been sick, or the baby's been sick, or my husband's been sick, so I've had to take care of the baby. It's a whole thing. Anywho, I appreciate all of you for being here with me, for supporting me, for anybody who sent me messages during the shitty last week that I had. Always appreciate you. And if you have any suggestions for future episodes, again, just let me know. I love hanging out with you guys, so I will never stop doing it. Okay? I'll be here. Anywho, I hope everybody has a great rest of the evening. Always love talking with you and engaging with you. It's probably one of my favorite things in the whole entire world. Not even joking. And we'll see whatever the future holds for us, right? We're going to be here together doing it. So thanks, guys. Anyway, talk to you soon. See you next week. I hope everybody has a great rest of the evening, and I will talk to you later. Bye, friends.